Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. Happy to be here and talking to you. These always feel like so helpful, selfishly for me. And I hope that they do
Yeah,
something positive for our listeners.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How
Yeah,
are you?
this good. Yeah, I'm this past weekend I for the first time in 3.5 years I taught like 13 hours of trauma sensitive yoga. And so like it's the both and of like it's lovely to be teaching a group of people about how trauma lives in our bodies and how the yogic practice, the movement practice, the meditation, the breathing practices, all the spiritual, all the stuff can help people
Right.
heal from trauma. And like it means I didn't have a restful weekend.
Right.
So I'm sitting with the uh, part of what I was talking about like this weekend is I tend when I'm stressed to go into like a dorsal vagal mode, which is like a kind of like a retreat, conserve energy. And
Mhm.
like when I got home last night, my what's great is my spouse has gotten to the point where he's like, do you want to talk or do you want to be left alone? And I was like, I just want to be left alone, right? And so like that idea, like a younger version of me would have been like, oh, like you should try to connect. But the part of me that's in preservation mode is like September rocks in terms of like how many commitments I have. And I just think it's only for a couple of weeks and then it eases. But
Right.
when I'm in it, I'm like, how can I conserve energy in order to get through all these commitments that I enjoy? They just happen to all fall within like a 3 week period of time.
Oh, but you just said so much good stuff in that tiny little blurb about your weekend. Because that what we just said we talk about today is what feels to me like a tension between something identifying that something that is not working and like in my tendency to troubleshoot problem solve whatever, um or as though it's one or the other and it's not, or just like be accepting and kind of patient. And so I heard you acknowledge that this is temporary and there's some level of acceptance there, but I also heard you say that you can recognize like you made these choices and you made these commitments, and that's been something that I've been playing with a little bit about like I am feeling stressed, but like when I look at what I'm doing today, these are all things that I chose. And that once I'm in them, I do enjoy them. So I love that reminder of agency. I think that that's a helpful thing when you're going through it.
Yeah, and I loved what you said right before we got on, which is funny because that's part of what I was teaching this weekend was around like when we're stressed or in difficult situations, how can we add ease to the situation, right? Like, because there have been times where I make the situation worse because of the energy I'm bringing into it, the story I'm telling myself, the ways I'm not accepting, I'm resisting. And so like adding like ease, like what does that mean in terms of ease? Like, and I can feel it in my body that even though I'm more my schedule is more pressured than I ideally want, I most of the time am bringing ease into it, which means like
Yes.
sometimes I let go. Like last Thursday was a terrible commuting day, and part of that meant that I was going to have to miss the beginning of back to school night for one of my kids, and I just like accept, right? Like my spouse is going. If I miss the beginning, not a big deal. It's not like it's a new school. Like just having to tell myself the story of like it's okay. Like there's nobody
Right.
dying. It's serious. I would like to be there for all of it. It's okay if I'm not. And I think it's like that's the ease. Like it would be great to be there. It's okay if I'm not. And it's okay to have feelings of disappointment. And then I move on.
Totally. I love that. And I was just telling Natalie for our listeners before we started that like I'm trying, I've got all this pain in my body and my kid is struggling in certain ways. And so I am trying to like troubleshoot these things. Um, but when I'm approaching these things, right, with resistance, with stories of victimhood about these things, with all this suffering, that I can hear yoga teachers in my head being like, right, so this isn't great, but like, how can you, or this pose that I'm asking you to be in is truly difficult, and it is going to be, you're going to experience intense sensation. They would even say discomfort, intense sensation, right? But how can you bring more ease into this pose? And I've been thinking about that a lot over these last several weeks as I am like trying to get the care that I need and trying to like get the care that Lincoln needs. And you're right, so there's nothing specific I don't think that I can do. I don't think it's another thing I add to the plate, right? I think it is in part just a mindset shift about like this is what it is right now, and I'm doing my best. And like, we didn't get here overnight. It's not going to go away overnight, you know? And so just that self-talk, I think is so easy to underestimate, but is so huge in terms of how we're approaching stressful or difficult times, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. My brain like went to a slightly different place of like, so part of what I was teaching this weekend was about how the oppressor lives inside of all of us.
Yeah.
I was saying how like an example is, so I'm someone who's like mostly neurotypical, and the other three people in my household are neurodiverse on some level. And by being in relationship with all of them, either like partnered or mothering them, over the years, I have discovered how I am neurotypically oppressive at times. And
Mm.
like work on myself of like, sure, you might like it to go in this linear fashion, and yet, and it might be very easy for you to organize it. And like the people you love and are in relationship, that's not how their brain works. That's not their strength and gifts that they bring to the world. And so you can hold on to this way that you're used to doing it, or you can adapt, you can surrender, you can yield, you can do it differently, and like let go of like the oppressor inside of you that says, no, it should be this way, which then like brings no joy and to anyone in the household.
That is so true. And I think the amount of times that and I know I'm not alone in this, and other folks struggle to let go of whatever it is, right? Of the right way, or this belief system that shows up in behavior, in relationship in a certain way, whatever it is, like can be such a struggle to just let go. And that word surrender, especially, I've had moments in my life where I can deeply feel the peace that comes with that. And there are other times in my life where surrender sounds so fucking scary. And I think that's true for a lot of folks. How can you talk to me about how you build that practice in for you, like the process of surrender, to even like have that on your radar as a possibility for you to choose at any point? Yeah, how do you build that in?
Yeah. I think I start with the body. Like I can tell when my body is tight or tense or like I feel like there's not an expansiveness to me. And I think because I've built this muscle of like asking myself, do you have choices here? Like, yeah, like there isn't one right way, right? And I think it took me a long time to realize there isn't one right way. There might be the way I prefer, but that doesn't way. Like lots of people do totally fine doing it differently. And can I? A friend used to say, like, do you want to be at war or do you want to be at peace?
Mm.
Sometimes I ask myself, like, is this you being at war, or is there a way that you can yield, or you can surrender, or you can let it be messy, or you could let it turn out this way, even if you don't like how it's turning out, but at least like the relationship matters, or your peace or serenity matters, or like there's a little bit more ease in the relationship. So I think it's like this. I think that's why the meditative practice is so helpful. It's like the pause and see, like, are there other pathways you're not considering or unwilling to consider? And that question of unwillingness, and like, I don't have to suffer, right? Like, I think about like some of the noble truths, right? Is that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And like, what are our attachments that make it difficult for us to recognize that maybe we have more choices? Sometimes we don't have choice of what's going to happen, but our attitude and like how we go into it and how we leave it, that's the part we have a choice around.
Right. And I love that we talk about curiosity, I feel like a lot on here, but that's what comes up for me when you talk about that, is just the ability to be curious. And you're right, we have to show up in a way that leaves room for that. And that's, if that's a meditative breath or pause, just how do we create more space? Because I think the way, at least the way that I've lived my life, and I think the way that a lot of people live their lives, is just like going around like kind of urgently trying to like fix whatever, or like get things done, whatever needs to be done. And everything is just like so fast, so fast, so fast. And one of the things that I'm trying to be so intentional about, I have all this like pain in my neck, and it's from rampant self-neglect since April. So I know how it got here, but since I figured out that I've been neglecting myself, probably since the beginning of August, I've been trying to take really good care of myself. And I started with this functional medicine doctor that we talked about several episodes ago. And I'm back in chiropractic, doing chiropractic work, and it's not going anywhere. And I can feel the urgent, like, do I have to do something different? Like, oh my gosh, so painful. I need to sleep. Oh, it feels emotional even talking about it. Like, it really hurts. But one of the things that I've been trying to do is, while I'm laying there, like getting ready to be adjusted, or when she's doing acupuncture, is just trying to even ask my body, like, what do I need to release? Like, what my body is trying to communicate something to me. And perhaps I am not listening. And so it's perhaps this part of why it's persisting, right? So I've just been, every time I'm laying there, I'm like, what do I need to learn? What do I need to release? What do I need to let go of? But that's been very absent, you know, for me. And this is such like a micro personal example, but I see this playing out in my life, in my family's life, in society, from micro to very, very macro all the time. When we rush urgently towards solutions, we might be missing some important lesson, which means we're maybe applying the wrong solution, and it's just gonna like come back. And then it's whack-a-mole, because we're not taking the time to get curious about it, bringing it full circle. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that like being patient with your body and figuring out like what's the mind body connection, and what do you have control over, and what you have to accept, and like that patience, it can be so hard. Like, I think like a part of like my mind body is, I think we've talked like briefly about it, I don't know how much on this podcast, about like I've been breaking up a diet culture like the last couple of years, and like it's been such a struggle for me at times, with like this accepting that I'm in this shape and this size in the last few years that I hadn't been before, and trying to just be really healthy and not getting caught up on like what the scale says, right? And not wanting to go on a diet, because that is not sustainable for me. Like, I just want to like eat the foods that I like, that make me feel good, and like ignore all of the other noise, and even physicians who try to like fat shame and stuff like that. And like, but I want to like listen to what my body says. I don't want to deprive it of things. I want to enjoy food. I love to exercise. And it's more about like, what's health at this size, at this age. And what is stressing me out that might make it harder at times for me to do healthy things? Or am I getting enough sleep? Am I moving enough? Like, can I be satisfied with small goals? Like my Apple Watch says that in the last couple of months, like maybe like from like the spring to now, I walked 2,000 more steps a day than I did a year ago, which is like, okay, right? And so like I think like all of these ways in which, how do we have ease with our bodies in whatever showing up in this season of our life? And what are ways that we can add to the suffering and pain that already exists? And what are the ways that we can reduce some of that suffering?
Totally. And it's always this idea of like acceptance versus change, and what do I accept and what do I work toward change? It's like it's probably always a little bit of both, right? But I think the way that it gets messaged on a really larger scale, I think especially this has been extra, I feel like, heightened for me and confusing for me since the racial reckoning of 2020, right? Where I would see all these pictures on social media and amazing quotes where it's like, I will no longer, what was it? I will no longer accept the things I cannot change. I will change the things that I cannot accept. And I was like, yeah, like, and that's right. And it's like the way that we show up in that matters, right? And if we're learning to accept things, how can we continue to work toward the small changes that maybe feel aligned while still being grounded in acceptance or ease? Yeah. Right. And if we've decided we really need to push forward with change, how can we bring ease? Right. And it's like, it's always both. And this has been such a reminder to me that's an intellectual truth for me. That is not an embodied truth for me yet. And it's something I think it's just going to maybe be my life's work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think about like, what are the ingredients I'm putting into my life? Like, that's the part I want to focus on. And like the outcome will be what it is, but what are the ingredients I'm putting in? So like, if I'm talking about like my health, then like, what are the ingredients I'm putting into my life that is supportive of health in the way that I define health, not what like some white centered cis like normative traditional Western medicine is going to say is health, because that might not apply to me, not apply to the average person. And yet, what are the nuggets of truth that might be there where like I should get the right amount of sleep for myself, right? Like I should eat foods that nourish me, I should get out and move. And so just thinking about like how to live through that without it being, I beat myself up if I, don't quite get there every single day, and like how to have just grace with that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The two things you said that really stand out to me is, how can I take back power and control to self-determine what's right for me rather than like letting the noise of experts or, like whatever society has to say about this? How can I self-determine? And maybe where some of the letting go can happen is letting go of outcomes, and being really present, right? Both of which, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, I've been really playing a lot with my spirituality, because I feel like that's the one of the main things that helps me find the both and, or the acceptance while I'm also striving, whatever it is. Like, spirituality is one of the main ways that I know how to do that, because I can recognize with ease, like, I can't do this on my own. I'm like not good at this on my own. I need help. And so spirituality has been part of what I've been calling on to help me find the balance, the striving toward change, while also like accepting it is what it is right now. And I think that's a big part of it for you too, right?
Yeah. Except, it's so interesting. Like I feel like spirituality is such an important part of my life. And yet, maybe because I don't feel like I'm doing it in the traditional religious way,
Right.
it feels intangible in a lot.
Mhm.
And maybe because at this point it's embodied. So like I don't go to church as much as I once did. I have a daily meditation practice. Um, like I'm trying to go to a yoga class once a week, and so like I think about like I'm deeply spiritual, and yet the the things that I would have associated with religion or spirituality feel not there, but yet they're so important. And maybe that's just a particular season of my life where like at some point going to church every week, that was the thing that gave me like an anchor to.
Sure.
And my yoga classes for a long time, meditation for a long time. But I think I'm just trying to live spiritual life. And for me, that means like love towards myself, love to others in the world, trying to be a good ancestor, leaving the world a better place. Um, and it's so interesting to have it be like feeling like it's out there.
Mhm.
What I was taught as a kid is the way.
Well, I resonate with that so much, that the messy middle is just, it's so much harder to define or categorize. And so does it make it feel less real to you?
No, no, not
No?
at all. But what's interesting for me is that so I grew up Roman Catholic, and my mom was very devout. My dad was not. He was a non-practicing Baptist. And what's interesting, so my kids are 13 and my son is about to be 16. Um, they've stopped going to church. And we go to this Unitarian church, and they stopped going, sometime in the pandemic. And one of them would say they're agnostic, and the other one would say that they're atheist. And part of me, and my spouse would say he's atheist, and part of me, though he was raised Roman Catholic, and so part of me is like, have I done this? Like, there's good and like cons, right? Like in some ways, I'm so glad that at this age for them, they're clear about like where they are in relationship to higher power, or if there is a higher power and all that stuff. And the other part of me is like, I'm so deeply spiritual, but I don't have those rituals like
Yeah.
I grew up in. And maybe that's part of why my kids are atheist and agnostic. And so I think it's like that sense of, as long as they're living a good life and they feel like good, then maybe my job has been successful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just so interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting, especially right when you don't have the framework of religion. Um, what does it look like, and how do you make it a part of your life in a meaningful way? And I think that for me, at least, that feels like really uncharted territory. Um, and that there are some things that are hard about that. And then for me, there's a lot of beauty in that, because it's like it gets to be whatever the fuck I want. And so yeah, I was raised Catholic. I think we've talked about this a little bit. But like Catholic light, we went to church some Sundays. I did CCD, which is like the thing that kids do to learn about whatever. And we celebrated, like traditional Christian holidays, but because my parents wanted me to have this like foundation or whatever. But it was being like very problematic because of all these things, and how do you make sense of like terrible things that happen to like good people, whatever. So I'm clear that I don't want traditional religion, but so it feels funny to me to like dip in. I've been praying, I guess. As I mentioned, I think last episode, I've been talking to my ancestors, and like experimenting with what it feels to like talk to my ancestors or spirit guides or, whatever. And asking for help with certain things. Asking, right, what the pain in my body is trying to teach me, offering gratitude, starting every day with gratitude, but I'm trying to incorporate it more intentionally and frequently, and maybe a little bit more formally, because it just feels like maybe this is the assistance that I need or could be beneficial for me as I navigate some of these things in my life that are not moving at the pace that I would like them to. So anyway, it's been an interesting journey, and I hear that it's ever changing for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So a question I have is, so when life sucks or bad things happen, or let's not say bad, like when heartbreaking things happen, how do you make sense of it?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm exploring with now. I mean, the model I grew up with doesn't fit, right? Yeah, where I like blamed God when heartbreaking things happened, and then was just like mad, essentially. And then it was like, oh, I don't forget him. Like there is no God, and like kind of like rebelled in the opposite direction. And now I feel like I'm in messy middle where I'm playing with this idea that the things in our life, when we experience pain, emotional or physical, heartbreak, etc., that there is maybe a lesson to be learned, which isn't punishment, right? But maybe there is something to learn. And so that's how I'm trying. But there are a lot of messages in the spiritual community about like everything is for you. Even like the bad stuff or the heartbreaking stuff is for you. And I struggle with that a little bit. I don't quite know how that works with a collective liberation lens or an anti-oppressive lens.
Mm.
But where I can feel like this aligns with me is like there's, whether it's for me to learn something or I can choose what I do with this.
Mm.
And I choose to look for meaning, and I choose to look for lessons, and and I choose post-traumatic growth. That's where I'm landing right now, but it feels tricky and complicated.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of it?
Yeah. I think I'm trying to think like where I default to, and I think I default to the Four Noble Truths, like that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, our attachments our attachments and ego stuff gets in the way, and there's a path to liberation, or there's like a path to freedom, like through certain practice. I think that's where like what I consider. I think the Four Noble Truths would say like the 8-limb path or something like that. And so I think that does it for me most of the time. Like this idea of, I can find meaning. I can find ways to suffer less.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think of like the lotus flower, like amazing things can happen from mud.
Yeah.
So.
And the Four Noble Truths is that from Buddhist?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's where it stops, because I wouldn't say that like I buy into all of the Buddhist stuff.
Sure.
Right? But I like the simplicity of my interpretation of the Four Noble Truths. And like my loose like following of that. I feel like that's the thing that captures me the most.
Yeah.
Universalism has like 7 or 8 principles that so it's more like value driven. And so I feel like I like things that are principles, not rules, like principles of like how to be curious in the world, and like how do I want to live in right relationship to my values, to the environment, people, how do I want to make space that we don't have to all believe the same things, and yet we don't have to oppress other people.
Right.
That stuff.
Yeah. I love that. I love that, because one of the things that's inherent in those Four Noble Truths, but not explicit, is that we have to make room to get curious about it, right? if this idea that pain is inevitable, but suffering isn't, it's like the only way then to not experience loads and loads of suffering when pain happens is to be cognizant of it, to be meta, to create that space, which obviously like meditation and yoga and all these things help with, right? But how do we continually make practices of creating space? Because that's the only way it's possible to really live in those principles or values, is if you can think about it, not just be in it, which I think is like half the battle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
What do you think?
Yeah, that feels juicy all by itself.
It
Yeah.
really does. Those are, I mean, because it's so simple. The words, the value, the principle, the idea are so simple. But I mean, that is some deep stuff to really embody and live on the reg, especially if there is a tough season, that you're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me think of when I was interviewing for this Catholic university I work for now, which is full of like Augustinian priests running around. And so one of the Augustinian priests, I had said I was agnostic, deeply spiritual and agnostic. And his question was like, how can you come to work at this Catholic university and be agnostic? And so like it was interesting on the spot to answer the question of like I'm so deeply spiritual and I believe there is truth to all of the religions, all the spiritual practices, and I just can't pick one and say I'm 100% in. And I think that there are more similarities between practices than like differences, but also that ultimately we're trying to figure out how to live in a messy world, right? Trying to like navigate fear and like have meaning and like be rooted in something bigger than ourselves, and however people get there, like, and it gives them comfort, like that's what's most important to me. And so like I guess that's the way that I kind of think about it, is I want people to have something that roots them, like when it's a hard day, what roots you?
Yeah.
Makes you think I can go another day, it can get better.
Right. Absolutely. Ugh. And that is what it comes down to when I think about it. For me, when I think about watching my kids struggle, when I think about watching society struggle, that's really what it boils down to, is how can we just keep going in a way that's not excruciating. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Mm. Oh, lots of good things to think about. This has been comforting to me. I hope other folks find comfort in this if they're in a season that's hard.
Yeah, and I would love to hear how they're rooting, how they are making sense of the world and its complexity and messiness and heartbreak, and also joy and gratitude, all of the things, all the ingredients.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Can't have one without the other. Awesome. Good to talk to you.
Take care.
Talk soon. Bye.